A desperate little girl ran through the rain, begging a billionaire to save her dying brother. He never expected her 5 heartbreaking words to shatter his world, and lead to a decision that would change all their lives forever. Before we get started, leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from so we can say hello to you. Now, on to the story. The cold Chicago rain fell like needles against the cracked sidewalks as Emily Dawson, just 9 years old, stumbled through the sliding doors of Riverside General Hospital. Her thin arms trembled beneath the weight of her 6-year-old brother, Liam, whose small body burned with fever. His head lolled against her shoulder, lips dry and cracked, eyes fluttering open only to roll back into unconsciousness. Emily's sneakers, soaked through and falling apart at the seams, squeaked against the polished tile floor as she staggered into the fluorescent chaos of the emergency room. "Please," she gasped, her voice raw and barely above a whisper. "Please, someone help. My brother's sick. He needs help." But no one looked. No one stopped. The reception area was a blur of beeping monitors, shouting voices, and the constant ring of phones. Nurses rushed between stations, families cried in corners, and the air stank of antiseptic and fear. Emily, in her torn sweatshirt and muddy jeans, looked invisible next to the well-dressed parents holding insurance cards and crying over co-pays. A woman behind the front desk finally glanced up. Her face was tired, her tone sharp. "Take a number and wait your turn, sweetheart." She didn't even see the child in Emily's arms. Emily's knees buckled. She sank into a hard plastic chair, cradling Liam tighter, trying to shield him from the world. His skin was hot, too hot, and his breathing came in short, shallow gasps. "Liam, please stay with me," she whispered, her tears sliding down her dirt-smeared cheeks. "Please don't leave me. I don't know what to do." People passed. Eyes avoided. A security guard looked, then looked away. To them, she was just another homeless kid with a sick brother, just another burden on a broken system. Emily rocked back and forth in the chair, whispering to Liam even though he couldn't respond. Outside, the storm howled louder, as if echoing the desperation in her heart. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to collide with a man who could change everything. All it would take was one glance. One cry. One moment of impossible hope. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room buzzed overhead, casting a cold, sterile glow on the chaos below. Emily Dawson stood frozen, clutching her brother Liam so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her arms, thin and trembling, strained under his weight. His body burned with fever, his skin flushed and damp, lips cracked from dehydration. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, louder than the ringing phones and the beeping monitors that surrounded her. "Please," she gasped, her voice trembling, "my brother needs help." But no one looked her way. The waiting room was packed. Families in designer coats spoke loudly, demanding immediate attention. Well-dressed parents clutched insurance cards. Children sat in their parents' laps, sniffling into tissue packs pulled from clean purses. Emily, in her ripped sweatshirt and mud-streaked jeans, didn't even register to them as real. "Ma'am," a frazzled receptionist called out, barely glancing up from her computer. "Take a number and wait." A number? Emily looked around in disbelief. Liam didn't have time for numbers. His head lolled against her shoulder, and for one terrifying second she thought he'd stopped breathing. Panic surged through her chest. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed into a hard plastic chair near the wall, cradling Liam in her lap like a fragile bundle. "It's okay," she whispered into his ear, rocking him gently. "I've got you. Just stay with me, okay? Please." But her voice cracked, and the tears she had been holding back finally spilled down her cheeks. She buried her face in his sweaty hair, trying to muffle the sobs. Around her, the hospital moved on, indifferent to the girl in dirty shoes and her dying brother. Nurses walked past with clipboards. Security chatted by the vending machines. Nobody stopped. Nobody cared. Emily tightened her arms around Liam, shielding him from the world. Her stomach clenched, not from hunger, but from fear. She was losing him, and no one was listening. No one saw them. And if no one saw them, no one would save them. The rain came down in sheets, blurring the edges of the hospital's glass doors as Emily Dawson pressed her brother closer to her chest. Liam's fevered head lolled against her shoulder, his tiny hands limp, his breaths shallow. Inside, no one listened. No one cared. The waiting room was a swirl of urgency, but not for them. Nurses darted back and forth, phones rang non-stop, and the polished floor echoed with the sharp clack of heels and the quiet beeping of machines. Emily's eyes stung, not from the cold or the wet, but from helplessness. Her brother was slipping away and no one would even look at them. Her heart pounded so loud she could hardly hear anything else. "Please," she whispered again, but her voice was drowned in the chaos. And then she saw him. Through the hospital's wide glass doors, walking briskly in the rain with an umbrella held above his head by an assistant, was a man in a navy suit that seemed untouched by the storm. Tall. Confident. Powerful. His expensive leather shoes splashed lightly through the puddles, and even soaked by rain, he looked like he belonged to another world. But Emily didn't care who he was. She only knew one thing: he looked like someone people listened to. Gripping Liam tighter, she shot up from the plastic chair and burst through the doors into the downpour, her sneakers slapping the pavement. Her lungs burned as she pushed past the security guard who didn't even try to stop her. "Sir! Sir, please," she cried, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please help my brother." Jonathan Reed stopped mid-stride. For a moment, nothing moved but the rain. He turned toward the sound, toward the trembling girl standing in the rain, soaked to the skin, her arms wrapped protectively around the unconscious boy. Their eyes locked. And for the first time in years, something shifted inside him. The rain, the noise, the people around him all seemed to vanish. There was only her voice in his ears, raw and pleading. "Please," Emily cried again. "He's dying. I don't have anyone else." And just like that, Jonathan Reed, a man who built his empire on logic, not emotion, found himself kneeling in the storm beside a child he had never met, his heart breaking in a way he never thought possible. He didn't care that the $1,000 pants were now soaked and dirty. He gently touched the boy's hot forehead, then looked at Emily, really looked at her. He didn't see a beggar. He saw a sister fighting desperately to save the only family she had left. "Come with me," he said firmly, and pulled Liam into his arms. That moment shattered decades of emotional distance and changed all three of their lives forever. Jonathan Reed didn't make impulsive decisions. At 52, he'd built his billion-dollar hospital empire on logic, calculation, and ruthless efficiency. But as he looked down at the soaked little girl standing in front of him, clutching her unconscious brother in the freezing rain, something cracked. Emily Dawson's eyes weren't just pleading, they were desperate. Her tiny body trembled from the cold, her clothes clung to her skin, and her fingers clutched Liam like he was the only thing tethering her to this world. The boy in her arms looked barely alive. His lips were pale, and his forehead burned with fever. "Please, sir," she cried, her voice nearly breaking. "He's been sick for days. No one will help us. We don't have insurance, but I'll work for you, I'll clean your house, I'll do anything. Just save him." Jonathan's heart clenched. He hadn't felt something like this in decades. Not since before the money. Not since before he'd learned how dangerous emotions could be in a world driven by power. Without another word, he stepped forward, his leather shoes splashing in the rainwater. "Give him to me," he said firmly, crouching despite his designer suit soaking through. Gently, he pried Liam from Emily's arms. The boy barely stirred, his body limp and frighteningly hot to the touch. Emily stood frozen, watching, unsure if she'd done the right thing. "Come on," Jonathan said, his voice sharp with urgency. "Follow me." He turned and strode back through the hospital's sliding doors, barking orders the moment they opened. "I need a crash team in the VIP wing, now. Get Dr. Chen on the line. Priority 1. Emily ran after him, her soaked sneakers slapping against the tile floors. As they moved through the halls, staff parted in stunned silence. Nurses and doctors who usually bowed in respect now simply stared as Jonathan Reed, flawless, untouchable, and always in control, carried a feverish child in his arms like he was cradling something sacred. In that moment, he didn't care about protocol. Or image. Or business. All he could think was, what kind of world lets a little girl beg in the rain to save her brother? And just like that, his perfectly ordered life began to unravel, in the best possible way. The hospital room buzzed with quiet activity, but 9-year-old Emily Dawson sat frozen in the corner, her back against the sterile white wall. Across the room, nurses worked quickly, hanging 4 fluids and adjusting monitors around Liam's small, fever-ravaged body. Emily's wide eyes never left him. Her hands, scraped and raw, gripped the edges of her tattered hoodie as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. Jonathan Reed stood nearby, observing her with growing concern. Despite all his success, his empire of hospitals, his boardroom victories, he had no script for this moment. Emily looked like a child torn from war, not the streets of his own city. Her face was pale, her cheeks streaked with dried tears, and her eyes were glassy with exhaustion. "When did you last eat?" Jonathan asked softly, pulling up a chair beside her. Emily flinched as if the question itself was dangerous. She looked down at her knees, then back at her brother. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "I'm not hungry. I just need Liam to be okay." But her stomach betrayed her, growling so loudly it startled both of them. Jonathan didn't push. Instead, he quietly ordered food from the hospital cafeteria. A nurse brought in a tray, a simple sandwich, apple slices, and a small carton of milk. When Emily hesitated, Jonathan nodded reassuringly. The moment she picked it up, instinct took over. She devoured the sandwich in seconds, chewing so fast she nearly choked. Jonathan watched in silence, the lump in his throat tightening. This wasn't hunger. This was survival. As Emily finished the last of the apple slices, her eyes darted toward the hallway. Every sound, footsteps, intercom chimes, made her tense. She wrapped her arms protectively around herself. Jonathan realized then, this little girl wasn't just scared. She was conditioned, to expect pain, to hide hunger, to brace for violence. She looked back at Liam, who lay still, his chest rising with labored breaths. Then she turned to Jonathan, her voice cracking. "Please don't send us back." It wasn't just a plea. It was a cry from a soul that had been silenced for far too long. And in that moment, Jonathan Reed, who thought he'd built an empire, felt the first crack in the walls he'd spent his life hiding behind. That night, as rain tapped gently against the windows of the private hospital room, Jonathan sat quietly beside Emily, watching over Liam. The boy's fever had started to recede, thanks to the swift action of the medical team. But Emily hadn't moved from her brother's side in hours. Her eyes, wide and shadowed, scanned every corner of the room like she was waiting for something, or someone, to burst through the door. Jonathan saw it, the vigilance, the fear. This wasn't just a girl afraid of illness. It was something much deeper. He lowered his voice and asked gently, "Emily, where are your parents?" She looked away. "Mama died in a car accident. 2 years ago. We don't know who our dad is." Jonathan nodded, giving her space to continue. "Rob was Mama's boyfriend," she added after a long pause. "He said he'd take care of us." Emily pulled her sleeves down self-consciously, but not before Jonathan caught a glimpse of deep, dark bruises on her small arms. Jonathan's heart clenched. He leaned forward, keeping his voice steady. "Emily, did he hurt you?" Her lips trembled. "He says if we tell anyone, they'll take us away from each other. That will be put in different foster homes." Her voice cracked. "Liam's all I have left. I can't lose him too." Jonathan reached out, gently resting his hand on hers. "Emily, what if I told you there's another way? That you and Liam could stay together. And be safe." Her eyes darted up to meet his, filled with a mix of hope and terror. "You mean that?" Before Jonathan could answer, a soft moan came from the bed. Liam was waking up. "Madison," he murmured weakly, confusing her name with Emily's. "I'm here, buddy," Emily whispered, rushing to his side. Liam's glazed eyes slowly found Jonathan. "Who's the nice man?" "This is Mr. Jonathan," Emily said gently. "He saved you." Jonathan swallowed hard. Looking into Liam's pale face, he knew, this wasn't just charity. It was a responsibility. One that he hadn't expected, but one he could no longer walk away from. Because what they needed now wasn't just a savior. They needed someone who wouldn't leave. And for the first time in years, Jonathan Reed decided to be that someone. Emily looked at him, her eyes wide with a question she'd never dared ask. "What happens next? When he gets better, do we go back to him?" Jonathan didn't hesitate. "No," he said firmly. "You're not going back to Rob. Not ever." Emily's breath caught, the weight of that promise hanging heavy in the silence. "Then, where do we go?" Jonathan looked down at her, this trembling, brave child who'd carried her brother through a storm and begged a stranger to save him, and for the first time in his life, he knew the answer without checking a balance sheet. "You're coming home with me," he said. "Both of you. Tonight." The black Mercedes purred quietly as it pulled through the towering iron gates of Jonathan Reed's lakefront estate. Emily Dawson and her little brother Liam pressed their faces against the backseat window, their wide eyes taking in the sprawling grounds. The mansion looked like something out of a storybook, a castle made of stone and glass, with towering trees, glowing lanterns, and ivy creeping up its pillars. "Do you live here?" Liam whispered, his voice filled with awe. Jonathan glanced at them through the rearview mirror. "Just a big house that's been too quiet for far too long," he said softly, the word surprising even himself. As the car came to a stop in front of the grand entrance, staff hurried down the steps, umbrellas in hand. But they didn't know what to do. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't anything like the structured, predictable life they were used to serving. Jonathan, the man who hadn't let a single unscheduled meeting happen in 2 decades, had just brought home 2 soaking wet, exhausted children with no warning. Inside, Sandra, Jonathan's trusted assistant of 15 years, was already on her phone, issuing rapid-fire instructions. "Get the guest wing ready, 2 beds, warm lighting, something comforting. And call the children's boutique, I want new clothes here in an hour." Jonathan barely acknowledged her. His attention stayed on Emily, who stepped tentatively into the marble foyer. She paused, her eyes scanning the high ceilings, ornate chandeliers, and expensive furniture. But she wasn't admiring. She was analyzing. Jonathan noticed how her gaze darted to every exit, every window, every hallway, like she was mapping the house in her mind. Escape routes, he realized. She was still afraid. Still in survival mode. "Is this safe?" she asked under her breath, clutching Liam's hand tighter. "You're safe here," Jonathan said gently, bending down to her eye level. "I promise." Upstairs, Mrs. Hargrove, the longtime housekeeper, scrambled to prepare rooms that had never been used for anything but visiting dignitaries. She added soft blankets, stuffed toys, and nightlights, though no one had asked her to. She'd seen the way Liam had clung to his sister's hand like a lifeline. She knew. Later, as warm baths filled and new pajamas arrived in elegant boxes, Jonathan stood in the hallway outside their new room, listening. Laughter. Actual laughter. Liam giggling at something Emily said. The sound twisted something inside Jonathan's chest. Something old and empty cracked open. Sandra joined him, her voice low. "Sir, are you sure about this? This isn't exactly your area of expertise." Jonathan didn't answer immediately. He watched as Emily cautiously examined a security panel on the wall, memorizing it. Not because she didn't trust him, because she didn't trust anyone yet. "Maybe it should be," he said finally. And for the first time in his life, the mansion didn't feel too big. It felt like it was finally waiting for the right people to come home. The early morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Jonathan Reed's lakefront mansion, casting a golden glow over the polished hardwood floors. The house was still, the quiet broken only by the faint rustle of footsteps in the kitchen. Jonathan had risen early, unable to sleep. His thoughts kept circling back to the two children who now occupied his guest rooms, children who'd known more pain in their short lives than most adults ever would. Drawn by a sense of unease, he stepped into the kitchen just in time to see a small figure move furtively near the counter. It was Emily. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her tiny hands, trembling, reached for the basket of dinner rolls left out from last night. One by one, she stuffed them into the pockets of her oversized sweater, her movements quick, practiced, almost mechanical. She moved like a child who had done this many times before, too many. "Emily?" Jonathan said gently. She froze. Her back stiffened. Slowly, she turned, eyes wide with fear. Her cheeks flushed as if she'd been caught stealing something precious. I wasn't going to eat them all," she stammered. "Please, I'll put them back. Just don't be mad at Liam. He didn't do anything. This was my idea." Jonathan stepped closer, kneeling so they were eye level. Hey, you're not in trouble," he said, his voice soft, calming. "I'm not mad at you. But I need to understand, why are you hiding food?" Emily looked down, clutching a roll in both hands like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "In case Rob finds us," she whispered. Sometimes he wouldn't let us eat for days. Liam gets really sick when he's hungry. So I try to hide food when I can. Just in case." Jonathan's heart clenched. He'd always believed himself to be a man of logic, but nothing in his vast business experience had prepared him for the raw, quiet terror etched into this little girl's face. "There's always food here, Emily," he said, his voice thick. "You don't ever have to hide it again. No one's going to lock you up. No one's going to punish you. You're safe now." But she didn't answer. Not really. She gave a small nod, but her eyes were still guarded, still searching for exits, still calculating escape routes. It would take time. Her body was here, but her mind was still in survival mode. Jonathan stood slowly, fighting the sudden burn in his chest. This child had memorized hunger. She had learned fear as a reflex. And even now, in a mansion filled with warmth and safety, she couldn't believe it would last. As he watched her slip out of the kitchen, still clutching one roll in her pocket, Jonathan made a silent vow: he would give Emily and Liam more than food, more than shelter. He would give them peace, and a life where they never again had to plan for survival. Not ever again. Dinner that night was served in the grand dining room of Jonathan Reed's mansion, the chandeliers casting a soft golden light over the gleaming table set with fine china and silver. The setting was elegant, perfect, even warm. But the two children seated at the far end of the long table looked completely out of place. Emily sat stiffly, her eyes scanning every movement like a soldier expecting an ambush. Liam clutched his spoon like it might be taken from him at any moment. Jonathan watched them quietly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them feel comfortable, not interrogated. A roast chicken had been prepared, with buttery mashed potatoes and steamed vegetables, food that would have delighted any normal child. But Emily barely touched her plate. Liam nibbled at a roll, his eyes darting toward Jonathan every few seconds, unsure whether he was allowed to eat. "Go ahead," Jonathan said gently, nodding toward the food. "It's all for you." Liam looked up at him, then down at his plate, and finally asked the question Jonathan didn't see coming. "Mr. Reed," the boy said softly, "why are you being nice to us? What do you want us to do for you?" The words stopped Jonathan cold. He set down his fork slowly and looked at Liam, then at Emily, whose face had gone pale. She didn't move. Her expression told him everything. This wasn't the first time someone had helped them with expectations. This was how they had been taught to survive. Kindness had a cost. Nothing came free. "I don't want anything from you," Jonathan said quietly, his voice measured but weighted with emotion. "Not a single thing." Liam frowned, clearly struggling to make sense of that. "But Rob always said we had to earn our keep," he whispered. "That nobody helps you unless they get something back." Jonathan's heart cracked open a little wider. "Well, Rob was wrong," he said, firmer now. "Sometimes people help others just because it's the right thing to do." Emily finally spoke, her voice sharp and suspicious. "Nobody's ever helped us for nothing. Ever. Why would you be different?" Jonathan looked between the two fragile, wounded souls sitting across from him. Children, just children, who had been taught to see every act of kindness as a trick, every kind adult as a potential threat. "Because you deserve better," he said, barely keeping his voice steady. "Because no child should ever have to beg for their life or feel like they have to earn love." The room fell into a silence so deep it hummed. Liam blinked rapidly, staring at the plate in front of him. He reached for another roll with trembling hands. Emily finally picked up her fork, though she didn't eat. Her gaze remained locked on Jonathan, searching his face for any hint of deception. She didn't find any. That night, something small but powerful shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the first flicker of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, not all adults wanted something in return. Maybe this man meant what he said. And maybe, just maybe, they were finally safe. Later that evening, long after the house had settled into a gentle hush and the moonlight spilled across the grand hallway floors, Jonathan found Emily sitting alone on the bathroom floor. The harsh tile was cold beneath her, but she didn't seem to notice. Her small body was hunched forward, her back trembling slightly with each sob that escaped her throat. Clutched tightly in her dirt-streaked fingers was a faded, crumpled photograph. Jonathan didn't speak at first. He simply lowered himself to sit beside her, letting the silence speak its own language. "She looks like she was kind," Jonathan said softly, glancing down at the picture. A young woman with warm eyes and a gentle smile beamed from the worn photo. Emily nodded slowly, still crying but trying to stifle it. She whispered, her voice cracking with grief. "She used to sing to us every night, even when she was tired. She called Liam her little lion because he was so brave when he had fevers. And she'd make these silly voices when she read bedtime stories." Her fingers tightened around the picture. "I hid this in my shoe every day, because Rob said if I didn't behave, he'd throw it away." Jonathan's jaw clenched. That one sentence felt like a knife to the chest. The idea of a child so desperate to hold on to a piece of her mother, her only anchor to a better time, was devastating. "He took everything else," she said, voice barely above a breath. "But I wouldn't let him take her. This is all I have left." Jonathan gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not going to lose this, Emily. Or anything else that matters to you. Not anymore." Her wide, exhausted eyes met his. "Do you think she'd be proud of me?" The question came out so quietly, so full of longing, it nearly undid him. "I think she'd be in awe," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. You protected Liam when no one else did. You held your family together in the worst of times. You were brave when it mattered most. Emily looked away, ashamed. But I'm still scared. I keep thinking, what if you decide we're too much? What if you send us away like everyone else did? Jonathan's heart broke again, this time not with anger, but with a helpless kind of sorrow. Emily, he said gently, reaching for her hand. I'm not going anywhere. Not today. Not tomorrow. You and Liam are safe here. This is your home now. And you don't have to carry this alone anymore. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time, they weren't just from pain. There was something else there, something hesitant and fragile. Hope. For the first time, she let herself lean into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Jonathan sat perfectly still, understanding the weight of what this moment meant. That night, beside the photo of her mother and the man who had become her safe place, Emily allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Belonging. The sun was barely up when the serenity of Jonathan Reed's estate shattered like glass underfoot. He was in his study, reviewing architectural blueprints for a new pediatric wing at Wellington Medical Center, when a knock came, sharp, urgent. His housekeeper, Mrs. Anderson, stood in the doorway, her usually composed face pale with tension. "Sir," she said, her voice tight. "There's a man at the front gate. He says his name is Rob Morrison. He's demanding to see the children." Jonathan's blood ran cold. "Where are Emily and Liam?" he asked immediately. "In the garden with the tutor. They don't know he's here. Shall I bring them inside?" He shook his head, rising swiftly. "No. Just keep them away from the windows. I'll handle this." From the tall windows of his study, Jonathan could already see the figure pacing beyond the iron gates, a man in his early 30s, disheveled, eyes darting, aggression bleeding from every movement. The man radiated danger. Jonathan stepped outside, flanked by two silent security guards. Rob leaned on the gate with false familiarity, flashing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Well. The famous Mr. Reed. Playing house with my kids now? They're not your children, Jonathan said evenly, steel in his voice. And they're not going back to you. Rob's expression twisted with amusement. See, that's where you're wrong, rich boy. He reached into his tattered briefcase and pulled out a crumpled folder. Court papers. Legal guardianship. Jennifer, God rest her, signed them over to me before she died. Judge stamped and everything. You? You're a kidnapper. Jonathan took the documents, scanning them quickly. They looked authentic, but something about them smelled wrong, too rushed, too convenient. Still, on the surface, Rob had played his cards well. These children are traumatized, Jonathan said coldly. They're bruised, underfed, and terrified. No court will return them to an abuser. Rob's eyes narrowed. Prove it. Bruises? Kids fall. Get clumsy. Maybe they got sick. It happens. Doesn't make me a monster. I've raised them for 2 years while you were busy counting your billions. Now you want to swoop in like some white knight? Jonathan's patience frayed. Get off my property. But Rob stepped closer, lowering his voice to a venomous whisper. You think this is over? Those kids are my income, Reed. Emily brings in $50 a day on the street. Liam may be 30, even when he's sick. You think I'm letting you take away my golden goose without a fight? You've got no idea who you're messing with. Jonathan's fists clenched, his breath shallow with fury. From inside the house, he suddenly heard the distant sound of a child crying. Then Emily's terrified voice, he found us. We have to run. Rob smiled at the sound. They remember who they belong to. Jonathan stepped forward, close enough for Rob to see the fire in his eyes. Not anymore. As security escorted Rob away from the gate, Jonathan knew this was only the beginning. The monster had returned, and he was ready for war. The morning sun had barely touched the skyline when Jonathan Reed's world began to unravel. His phone buzzed with growing urgency, first one call, then 5, then 20. Reporters, board members, investors, and even old acquaintances were suddenly desperate to speak with him. The headlines spreading across every major news site were as ruthless as they were false. "Billionaire kidnaps poor children," screamed the Chicago Tribune, accompanied by a photo of Rob Morrison standing dramatically outside Jonathan's estate, crocodile tears streaking his unshaven face. On the local news channel, Rob's performance was painfully convincing. "They were my whole world," he sobbed, clutching a worn photo of Emily and Liam. "I raised them since their mama passed. We might not have money, but we had love. And now that man, he just took them away." His voice cracked at all the right moments. What gives a billionaire the right to rip a family apart? Jonathan stared at the screen, jaw tight, his coffee untouched. The footage shifted to protesters gathered outside Wellington Medical Center, waving signs that read, "Children aren't for sale," and "Justice for Rob Morrison." His assistant, Sandra, entered the room cautiously, holding a clipboard filled with damage reports. "The press is camped out at all 3 hospitals," she said quietly. "The board is nervous. They're asking if the South Side expansion should be delayed until this passes." Jonathan didn't answer. His mind was racing. He had dedicated decades to building trust in this city, hospital wings, scholarships, neighborhood clinics, and now one manipulative man was threatening to dismantle it all with a lie. That evening, he forced himself to attend the Chicago Children's Fund Gala at the Palmer House Hotel. It was a black-tie event, packed with donors, city officials, and society's elite. But the moment Jonathan entered the grand ballroom, conversations quieted. Eyes turned. The whispers stung more than he expected. "There he is," someone murmured. "The guy who stole those kids." "Midlife crisis," another voice hissed. "Trying to play daddy." Jonathan kept walking, head high, shoulders square. He spotted Mayor Patricia Reynolds across the room. She didn't wait for him to approach. "Jonathan," she said curtly, "this situation with the children, it's affecting city projects. I have board members breathing down my neck." Jonathan met her eyes calmly. "Children's lives aren't city projects, Patricia." Before she could reply, a new voice cut through the murmur like a blade. Well, enjoying the party, Mr. Reed?" Jonathan turned to see Rob Morrison, cleaned up in a cheap rental suit, standing smugly among a cluster of curious guests. He was supposed to be banned from the event, but somehow, he'd slipped in. Probably through some media connection. Rob spoke loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear. "I hope you're proud, Jonathan. While I'm out here grieving the loss of my kids, you're sipping champagne." Jonathan clenched his jaw. "Emily and Liam are safe. Safer than they've ever been with you." The room fell into a charged silence. All eyes were now on them. "They're prisoners in your mansion." Rob cried, theatrically. "Emily cries herself to sleep, begging to come home." Before Jonathan could respond, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sandra. "Liam saw Rob on TV. Panic attack. You need to come home. Now." Jonathan didn't hesitate. He turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the donors, the whispers, and the carefully curated public image he'd built over decades. Because 2 children needed him, and for once in his life, that was all that mattered. Jonathan Reed had been through corporate takeovers, hostile media campaigns, and boardroom betrayals, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of Liam's terrified face as he watched the news that night. It began with a text from Sandra. "Turn on Channel 7. Now." Jonathan had just returned from the gala, his tailored tuxedo still immaculate despite the emotional war he'd just endured. He switched on the television in his study. There he was, Rob Morrison, standing outside the Wellington estate, crocodile tears glistening under the media spotlight. He just took them, Rob sniffled, voice cracking for the cameras. Swooped in with his private jet and snatched my babies. I've raised Emily and Liam since their mama died. We may not be rich, but we were family. Jonathan's jaw clenched. The audacity. The manipulation. The absolute evil of it. He barely had time to react before Mrs. Anderson's panicked voice crackled over the intercom. "Sir, it's Emily. She found Liam in the closet, he's having a panic attack." Jonathan didn't wait for the elevator. He took the stairs 3 at a time. He found them huddled in the corner of Liam's closet, the little boy gasping for air, his body shaking uncontrollably. Emily had both arms around him, whispering through her own tears. He saw Rob on the TV, she choked out. Now he thinks he's coming back. He thinks it's his fault. Jonathan dropped to his knees beside them, unbothered by the hardwood floor bruising his skin. He gathered Liam gently into his arms, rocking him back and forth with a tenderness he didn't know he was capable of. "You're safe," he murmured over and over. "You're safe, buddy. No one's taking you anywhere." It took nearly 2 hours for Liam's breathing to return to normal. Jonathan held him the entire time, refusing to let go. Emily never left her brother's side either. Her eyes, so young, yet weathered with years of fear, remained locked on the door, just in case. When Liam finally fell asleep from exhaustion, Jonathan tucked him into bed and sat at the edge in silence. Emily remained standing. "I should have turned off the TV," she whispered. "I should have protected him." Jonathan stood and placed both hands on her shoulders. "Emily, none of this is your fault. You've protected him more than anyone ever has. You've been his mother, his sister, his whole world. But now it's my turn to protect both of you." Her lower lip trembled. "Do you promise?" "I do," he said, voice tight. "And I'm going to prove it." The next morning, he met with Detective Maria Santos and Thomas Bradford, a ruthless family lawyer known for never losing. The war Rob had started was now Jonathan's to finish. He would use every cent, every connection, and every ounce of power he had to protect the children who had become his world. This wasn't just about guardianship anymore. It was personal. Jonathan sat across from Detective Maria Santos and attorney Thomas Bradford, his heart pounding as the leather chair creaked beneath him. The room was quiet except for the rustle of paperwork. Every second felt like it dragged on for hours. The questions swirled in his mind, but he waited, eyes locked on the thick folder in Santos's hands. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice steady, but every muscle in his body tensed. Santos took a breath, then opened the file slowly. "We ran a deep background check on Rob Morrison. What we discovered is deeply disturbing." Jonathan leaned forward. "For starters," she continued, "Rob is not biologically related to Emily or Liam. There's no legal adoption either. No blood, no court-approved guardianship." Jonathan's brows furrowed. "Then how did he get custody?" "Forgery," Bradford answered grimly. "He submitted fake paperwork with Jennifer Dawson's, Emily and Liam's mother, signature, claiming she wanted Rob to be their guardian after her death." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Did no one verify this?" "It was rushed through a crowded court system," Santos explained. "Overworked, underfunded, no one looked too closely. It was a tragic oversight." Jonathan's stomach turned. These children hadn't just slipped through the cracks, they'd been shoved into the arms of a monster. "But there's more," Santos added, her tone darkening. "Rob has been investigated twice before for child exploitation. Accusations of forcing kids to panhandle and even steal for him. But nothing ever stuck. The children were too afraid to testify. She pulled out several photographs and slid them across the table. Jonathan's breath caught. Young, hollow-eyed children, bruised, malnourished, faces that mirrored the same fear he'd seen in Emily and Liam. These three were with Rob over the last 5 years. They've all disappeared from the system, she said quietly. We're still trying to find them. Jonathan's hand trembled as he picked up one of the photos. You think he trafficked them? We believe Rob was part of a larger child exploitation ring operating across state lines, Santos said. Emily and Liam lasted longer because they were young, and they obeyed. But once they grew older, Jonathan couldn't breathe. Bradford leaned forward again. There's one more thing, Jonathan. About Jennifer Dawson's death. The car crash. Jonathan's pulse quickened. Rob was behind the wheel. He was intoxicated. Police noted it in the report. But the charges were dropped. No follow-up. Jennifer died on impact. Rob walked away without a scratch. Silence fell across the room like a lead curtain. Jonathan felt as if the floor had been ripped from beneath him. Not only had Rob abused Emily and Liam, he had likely killed their mother. And he'd convinced Emily that it was her fault. His fists clenched on the table. That man didn't just hurt those children. He destroyed their world and made them live in guilt. Bradford nodded solemnly. And now it's time we destroy his. Jonathan stood, heart hammering with fury and purpose. The truth had come to light, and there would be no going back. The air inside the dim motel room was thick with tension as Jonathan Reed faced the man who had tormented 2 innocent children. Rob opened the door holding a half-empty beer bottle, his stained t-shirt clinging to his skin, and his eyes gleaming with arrogance. Well, he sneered. Look who finally showed up. Ready to hand over my kids and buy your way out of this mess. Jonathan didn't blink. He had come prepared. Beneath his coat pocket, his phone was already recording. I know what you did, Rob, Jonathan said coldly. You were driving drunk the night Jennifer died. You were screaming at her. You caused that crash. For a moment, Rob's grin slipped, but only for a moment. Prove it, he scoffed. Jennifer's dead. The kids were unconscious. No one remembers anything. And I've got the paperwork to back me up. Your word against mine. Jonathan took a slow step forward. Madison remembers more than you think. Rob let out a harsh laugh, stepping dangerously close. Madison's a scared little girl. She'll say whatever her new sugar daddy tells her. She's not a witness. She's just broken merchandise. The words made Jonathan's blood boil. But he kept his voice steady. You manipulated those children. You beat them. You made them think their mother's death was their fault. Rob's eyes gleamed with something darker now, something sick and triumphant. Yeah. So what if I did? Maybe I got tired of Jennifer's whining. She was going to leave, take the kids, ruin everything I built. Maybe I decided that if I couldn't have them, no one could. There it was. The words hung in the air like poison, soaking into every corner of the room. Jonathan's stomach turned. Rob didn't just kill Jennifer Harper, he meant to. You think you can fix those kids? Rob continued, sneering. You think a mansion and a few hugs can undo 2 years of what I put in their heads? They belong to me. I own them. I made them. You're just the next guy in line. Jonathan pulled out his phone and ended the recording. You just confessed to murder. Rob's face drained of color. What? That won't hold up in court. Maybe not, Jonathan said, backing toward the door, but it's enough to reopen the case, and enough for police to pay you a visit. Rob's mask shattered. His voice dropped into a growl. You bastard. I'll destroy you. I'll take the kids back, and when I do, they'll pay for every day they were with you. Jonathan slammed the door behind him and hurried to his car, heart pounding. He dialed Mrs. Anderson to check on the children. But her voice came through the line, panicked. "Sir, it's Tyler. He's gone." Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. "They found his backpack by the lake. He's missing." Rob had struck back. And Jonathan knew, it wasn't just a custody battle anymore. It was a race against time. Jonathan Reed had faced hostile boardrooms, volatile markets, and lawsuits that could bankrupt empires, but nothing compared to the pure, paralyzing fear that struck him when he heard the words, "Sir." Liam never came back from his walk. Mrs. Anderson's voice cracked over the phone, and for a moment, Jonathan forgot how to breathe. "His tutor, Ms. Peterson, is unconscious by the lake. Liam's backpack was found nearby. But he's gone." Time splintered. He sprinted through the house like a man possessed, barking orders into his phone. "Activate every security measure. Pull camera footage. Call the police. The FBI. I want air surveillance over this entire county in 15 minutes. Derek Morrison has my son." Madison collapsed to the floor in the living room, her screams shaking the chandelier. "No. He took Liam. He's going to hurt him because of me. I should have stayed quiet, I should have never told." Jonathan dropped to his knees beside her, gripping her trembling shoulders. "Madison, look at me. This is not your fault. Do you hear me? I swear to you, I'll bring him back." Detective Maria Santos arrived in record time, taking over the scene like a force of nature. Within minutes, the mansion transformed into a command center. Officers studied heat signatures on drone feeds. Helicopters sliced through the Chicago skyline. Amber alerts lit up every screen in the tri-state area. "Derek's desperate," Santos said grimly. "He knows the net is closing in. This kidnapping? It's his last card." For agonizing hours passed. Jonathan didn't sit once. His phone rang endlessly, hospital security, private investigators, local and federal agents. But every lead felt like a dead end. Until, at 11:47 p.m., the unexpected happened. The tip line rang. "I saw the news," said a woman's shaky voice. "I'm Sarah Chen. Derek's ex. He called me tonight, said he needed somewhere quiet to teach some brats a lesson. He asked to use my uncle's old warehouse on the south side. I didn't think he was serious, but..." Santos didn't even finish her instructions before the SWAT team mobilized. The warehouse was a rotting skeleton of metal and broken windows, a forgotten ruin in the industrial part of the city. Squad trucks screeched to a halt outside. Officers surrounded the perimeter, weapons drawn. Inside, Derek was ranting, drugged and delirious, pacing like a cornered animal. In the far corner, Liam sat huddled against the wall, his lips blue, his tiny frame bruised and limp. "Go! Go! Go!" the commander roared. The moment the door burst open, Jonathan was already pushing through the barricade of officers, heart pounding in his throat. "Liam," he called, voice cracking. The boy stirred, barely lifting his head. "Mr. Richard. I knew you'd come." Jonathan fell to his knees, scooping him into his arms like sacred glass. Liam's body was ice cold. Blood caked his temple. But he was alive. The sound of sirens echoed behind them as they rushed to the ambulance. And for the first time in his life, Jonathan didn't care about lawsuits, or reputation, or the headlines that would follow. All that mattered, was that he had his son back. The courtroom was packed with tension so thick it seemed to press down on everyone inside. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a cold glow over the wood-paneled walls of the Cook County Family Court. At the plaintiff's table sat Jonathan Reed, his jaw tight, his normally steady hands clenched as he glanced toward Emily, who sat stiffly beside their attorney Mr. Bradford. She looked so small in the witness chair, but there was a fire behind her eyes, a strength Jonathan had come to admire deeply. Across from them sat Rob Morrison, freshly shaved, wearing a wrinkled gray suit, his face a carefully manufactured mask of fatherly sorrow. His public defender whispered something in his ear, but Rob barely responded. His eyes were locked on Emily, a sneer twitching at the corner of his mouth. It made Jonathan's blood boil. Judge Patricia Rise, a veteran of 20 years in family law, presided with stern authority. "This is one of the most disturbing custody cases I've seen," she stated, scanning the thick file in front of her. She gestured toward Bradford. "Proceed." Bradford didn't waste a moment. With precision, he laid out the horror, the X-rays of Liam's injuries, fractured ribs, healed breaks, untreated head trauma. He presented the financial records found in Rob's possession, amounts earned daily by each child, even notes about how much more Emily made when she looked especially sad. Then came the recording, Rob's own voice, arrogant and cruel, boasting about how he broke the children to make them depend on him. The courtroom gasped. Rob's lawyer weakly objected. "These are unsubstantiated claims. Children's memories are notoriously unreliable." Then came the part Jonathan had dreaded. Judge Rise turned to Emily. "Miss Dawson," she said gently. "I know this is frightening, but I need you to tell us the truth. What was life like with Mr. Morrison?" Emily's small voice barely rose above a whisper. "He hit us. Every day. If we didn't bring home enough money, he wouldn't let us eat. When Liam got sick, he locked us in the basement." Her voice cracked, but she kept going, tears sliding down her cheeks. "He told us it was our fault Mom died. He said no one would ever love us again." Rob shot to his feet. "She's lying. I saved those kids," he bellowed. Judge Rise banged her gavel. "Mr. Morrison, sit down immediately." But Emily didn't flinch. She stood from her chair, her voice rising with conviction. "You didn't save us. You used us. Mr. Jonathan loves us. He doesn't hit us. He reads to Liam at night. He helps me with homework. He made us feel safe." Liam jumped from his seat in the gallery, running to his sister. "You were so brave," he whispered, clinging to her waist. Judge Rise wiped her eyes and turned to Jonathan. "This court awards permanent guardianship of Emily and Liam Dawson to Mr. Jonathan Reed. Mr. Morrison's parental rights are hereby terminated." As Rob was dragged away, still shouting threats, Jonathan dropped to one knee and pulled both children into his arms. "You're safe now," he whispered. "Forever." The warm sun shone down on Chicago's South Side as children laughed and played in the brightly painted courtyard of the newly opened Harper's Hope Foundation. What had once been a derelict warehouse now stood transformed into a sanctuary, a place where broken spirits could mend, where stories like Emily and Liam's were not just remembered, but honored. And at the heart of it all stood the man who had once walked away from emotion, Jonathan Reed, now a father, a protector, and the founder of something greater than wealth, legacy. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew press from across the Midwest. Cameras flashed, city officials applauded, and families watched with tear-filled eyes as Jonathan stepped up to the podium, flanked by Emily, now 10, and Liam, 7, standing tall and confident. He adjusted the microphone, his throat tightening as he looked out over the crowd. "A year ago," he began, "I met two children in a hospital parking lot. They were alone, terrified, and desperate. And they changed my life forever." His voice trembled with emotion. "Today, we open Harper's Hope in honor of their mother, Jennifer Harper, whose love lives on in every child we help." Emily stepped forward. "When Liam and I were hungry and scared, we thought nobody cared. But we were wrong. There are good people in the world, you just have to find them." Her eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on a little girl in a pink sweater clinging to her younger brother's hand. Emily smiled. She remembered that feeling, the ache of fear and the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would care. Liam adjusted his dinosaur tie and added, "Every kid deserves to feel safe and loved. That's what Harper's Hope is for." The ribbon fell, and the first families entered the building. Inside were therapy rooms, play areas, classrooms, and quiet spaces, all designed based on Emily and Liam's experience. Jonathan watched as Emily knelt beside the girl in the pink sweater. "Hi, I'm Emily. This is my brother Liam, and this is our dad, Jonathan. You're safe here now." Later that night, back at the mansion that now felt like a real home, Jonathan stood in his study, surrounded by children's drawings and news clippings about the foundation. Emily curled up on the couch beside him, holding a letter from a little girl the foundation had helped. "Dad," she whispered, her voice thick with feeling, "do you think Mama knows what we're doing?" Jonathan wrapped his arm around her and looked into her brave, unshakable eyes. "I think she sees everything. And I think she's proud of the light you've both become." From the ashes of loss and fear, something beautiful had risen. Not just a foundation, but a family, a purpose, and a future that burned brighter than Jonathan had ever imagined. And this is a good start. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 10 to 100. Tell us where you're watching from too. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking on the end screen now.